Headliner Nation, welcome in to the second part of our start and sit videos for week 17. If you missed the first part, let me give you a quick breakdown on how things are working this week. The first episode, which already dropped, is covering all the games that take place on Christmas, which is Thursday, and on Saturday as well. This video is going to cover all of the games that take place on Sunday and Monday. And when I say all the games, I mean all of the positions as well. So make sure you lock in because we have a ton of information that we are going to cover in today's video. We're going to be going through every single position, every single matchup, and today's video is going to feel a little bit different if you're not used to what we typically do in week 17. So hopefully you still get all the information that you normally would, but it is very important this week because we have to do these videos earlier that you check back at the rankings episode to verify if you're really still feeling good about the lineup you put together to start the week. The first matchup to talk about today will be Arizona at Cincinnati, and Cincinnati's defense gives up a ton of fantasy points. They give up the sixth most to the quarterback position, the most to running backs, and the most to tight ends. It is odd that they give up the fourth fewest to wide receivers, but that's just because running backs and tight ends score so much on them. Jacoby Brissett didn't end up having the ceiling last week that he's had so far this year. He's right back on the horse this week. Michael Carter is going to be a start for me. He's probably going to be the lead guy to finish the season here. Again, like I said, an absolutely great matchup. Marvin Harrison Jr. will be a fringe start for me this week because he was limited last week. Shocking. An NFL team told us they were going to limit a player and they actually did it, while Michael Wilson will definitely be a start. Not a huge game last week, but still scored a touchdown and can end up having a solid game here as well. Trey McBride going up against the defense that allows the most fantasy points to tight ends could absolutely have a field day. Cincinnati has a solid matchup at running back and at tight end. Chase Brown is going to be a start for me. Arizona allows the second most fantasy points per game, and Chase Brown has been hot to end the season. Mike Gesicki is going to be a fringe start. Right now, Arizona is allowing the seventh most fantasy points per game to tight ends. Gesicki's a guy that if he scores a touchdown, he's going to be fantasy viable. If he doesn't score a touchdown, he's not going to be fantasy viable. So this week, if you trust him to score, then you feel good about it. But if you don't, you're probably looking at safer options. While Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, all of them will end up being starts. Pittsburgh at Cleveland, and Pittsburgh is still fighting to make their way into the playoffs. The Ravens are not quite out of it as of yet, so this is a big game, one in which they are likely to not have DK Metcalf. Aaron Rodgers is going to be a fringe start. Going up against Cleveland, Myles Garrett is a half a sack away from tying the record, one sack away from breaking the record. Aaron Rodgers does not move nearly as well as Josh Allen. Myles Garrett is going to be in the backfield quite a bit. It's a tougher matchup, Cleveland allowing the fourth fewest fantasy points. Jalen Warren, Kenneth Gainwell, even in a really tough matchup against Detroit's front last week, they still absolutely killed it. And this matchup against Cleveland, who continues to get burned by the run after being so good to begin the season, both of these guys have been consistent enough. They deserve to be flex options for us. DK Metcalf is likely out this week. Calvin Austin is going to be questionable. Not really sure. Marquez Valdes-Scantling. There could be several guys that could end up stepping up. None of them I want to step up in my lineup. Cleveland allows the third fewest fantasy points per game. If there's going to be no wide receivers, that means that there has to be somebody from the tight end position. Who, though? Good luck rolling the dice. If I had to rank it, I would rank it Freiermuth, Washington, Smith, in that order. Freiermuth having the most upside, Darnell Washington probably being the safest, Jonnu Smith being a guy that would absolutely have to score a touchdown or he wouldn't be worth it. It's a solid matchup for Cleveland, but there's really not a ton that I want to roll with here. Now, if you take a look at Shedeur Sanders, Jared Goff played very well last week. The Pittsburgh defense has had trouble stopping wide receivers and quarterbacks all season long. Shedeur Sanders, to me, is going to be a fringe start guy in a 2-quarterback or super flex league. In a 1 QB league, I am not willing to risk it with him this week in championship matchups. When you take a look at the running back position, a lot of people asked about Raheem Sanders, given the fact that Judkins is done. Dylan Sampson has been questionable. I'm not on board with starting Raheem Sanders. If Dylan Sampson were to clear and play this week, he would be a fringe start because of the work that he could get in the passing game and the passing game alone. Raheem Sanders is not going to give you that type of work. And because of that, last week, Pittsburgh did a great job of shutting down Jahmyr Gibbs. Raheem Sanders is not going to be in my lineup. For the wide receiver position, Pittsburgh allows the 4th most fantasy points per game, but this has been a group that has been inconsistent all season long. They ran like 14 end arounds last week, it felt like. 14 jet sweeps with these guys. And they picked up some decent yards at times, but I need bigger plays and more touchdown potential than that. Harold Fannin for me is going to be a start. This is a great matchup. Pittsburgh allows the 3rd most fantasy points per game, and Harold Fannin has been one of the most heavily utilized tight ends all season long, especially when Shedeur Sanders took over as the starting quarterback. I absolutely would be starting him, and he has top 6 potential. New Orleans at Tennessee, and Chris Olave has been excellent in the second half of the season, and he hasn't missed a beat with Tyler Shuck at quarterback, which is great. In fact, he's probably even taken a little bit of a step up in terms of his overall ceiling, which is awesome. And one of the better calls that I made all offseason long. I am excited to see Chris Olave playing so well. He's going to be a start for me in this matchup. Tyler Shuck is going to be a guy that I look at. Once again, 2 quarterback super flex leagues. If you play in those, he's absolutely a solid QB2. In this matchup against Tennessee that allows the 8th most fantasy points per game, he could definitely help you win a fantasy championship this week. If you're trying to start him in a 1 quarterback league, though, I don't know if I'm willing to go that far. You have to be in desperation mode. For the running back position, Audric Estime, kind of gave him a look last week in a few different scenarios, but it ended up being Taysom Hill. Taysom Hill is a fringe start. This is an absolutely risky pick. You do not play Taysom Hill unless you are throwing darts and you are at the very bottom of the barrel of what you have to put out there. He ended up being the lead running back, we'll use air quotes there, last week, and we'll keep an eye on Alvin Kamara. Maybe he ends up playing, maybe he doesn't. Obviously, the Saints being out of the playoff picture, don't know if it really does a lot of good to try and bring Alvin Kamara back. Juwan Johnson, he would be a start in this matchup. Safer floor, showed a really high ceiling last week. And I already mentioned Taysom Hill, and man, whew, Sanders putting me on the naughty list for that one. Cam Ward has looked great to end the season. He has taken a huge leap from where he was at the beginning of the year to the last several weeks. He has at least 2 touchdown passes in each of his last 3 games, and he's only thrown 1 interception since all the way back in week 8. He is growing tremendously. And yeah, New Orleans allows the 7th fewest fantasy points per game, but I still think that he has presented enough over the last few weeks that in 2 quarterback or super flex leagues, you could use him as a QB2. Tony Pollard, another game over 100 rushing yards last week. No idea why all of a sudden he has figured it out over the last 3 weeks. But hey, I'll list him as a fringe start this week. He has a very vulnerable ceiling, but a solid floor. The wide receivers in the tight end position, we're going to go ahead and stay away from just because there's been so many inconsistencies. Jacksonville at Indianapolis, and Indianapolis got torn apart by the San Francisco 49ers, and now they're getting one of the hottest quarterbacks in the league, Trevor Lawrence. He's absolutely going to be a start for me this week after what Brock Purdy did to Indianapolis last week. Travis Etienne is going to end up being a start. Now, it is a tougher matchup, Indianapolis allowing the 9th fewest fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. However, he's been solid by helping out in the passing game as of recent. So even if his ceiling on the ground isn't that great, his floor is helped out by the way he's been utilized in the passing game. Indianapolis allows the 3rd most fantasy points per game. The only thing that I can tell you for sure is that I would start Jacoby Myers in this matchup. Not a high ceiling, but a solid floor. Parker Washington or Brian Thomas Jr. will end up being the dice roll. One of these guys could end up having a huge ceiling, but which one do you think is the guy that has the huge ceiling? And then Brenton Strange going up against Indianapolis, allowing the 8th most fantasy points per game. He's going to be a start for me as well after scoring a touchdown last week. The matchup against Jacksonville is going to be tougher for Indianapolis's offense than what San Francisco was. Phillip Rivers, I mean, he looked solid last week. I'm going to put him as a fringe start. I'm only considering him in 2 quarterback and super flex leagues. Jonathan Taylor, this is a team allowing the second fewest fantasy points per game to opposing running backs, and Taylor hasn't been able to get anything done as of recent. You have to play him, though. You can't sit him, and you really just have to hope that JT can maybe break a big play or two, or at least get enough receiving yards to help stabilize his floor for you, but you don't feel great about JT. For the wide receivers, Alec Pierce, Michael Pittman, they're both going to be fringe starts. Both of them could see a decent amount of targets. We know Alec Pierce can break a big play, scored a couple of touchdowns last week. Both of these guys are fringe starts, looking at them more as like a wide receiver 3 option than even as a wide receiver 2. Tyler Warren, Jacksonville allows the 9th most fantasy points per game, so we've got a solid matchup for him. Hopefully Phillip Rivers can look his way this week. Tampa Bay's got a solid matchup against Miami this week. Baker Mayfield, Miami allows the 10th most fantasy points. For Bucky Irving, Miami allows the 9th most fantasy points to running backs, and then at the tight end position, they're allowing the 2nd most fantasy points. However, Cade Otton will be questionable heading into the week, so not exactly sure that he'll even be able to play. Baker Mayfield has not looked great in the second half of the season. This is a matchup, though, where we are good to play him. If I had to guess, there's something wrong with Baker Mayfield, some sort of injury that he's playing through. Bucky Irving is getting absolutely shafted on goal line touches right now, which sucks, but this is the type of matchup where he could break some big plays, not only on the ground, but in the passing game. So because of that, he is going to be a start. Rachaad White's completely out of the picture. Sean Tucker, he has touchdown potential, but he could have 2 carries, one of them being for a touchdown. Emeka Egbuka, Chris Godwin, fringe starts. Not a great matchup. Miami's allowing the 9th fewest fantasy points per game. Mike Evans will end up being a start. If you play Mike Evans, touchdown and volume will absolutely be there for him. But Emeka Egbuka and Chris Godwin are solely based on 1 or 2 big plays. If they don't get them, they're not going to be fantasy viable. So really, these guys this week are only going to be emergency options for you. For Miami, Quinn Ewers is going to get another shot at it this week. Tua going to the bench for what is supposed to be the rest of the season. Quinn Ewers, even though it's a solid matchup against Tampa Bay, he's going to be on my bench. I have no interest in starting Quinn Ewers championship week. Devon Achane will be a start, though. Continues to be one of the best fantasy picks all of the season long. Jalen Waddle's going to be a fringe start. I think there's an opportunity for a decent amount of volume, but his ceiling is probably low-end wide receiver 2. His floor is probably wide receiver 3 at best. Darren Waller, it's a solid matchup against Tampa Bay, who allows the 6th most fantasy points per game, but really when it comes to Waller, we need a touchdown out of him. For the Patriots and the Jets, the biggest question mark is going to be TreVeyon Henderson. Will he be cleared from the concussion protocol in enough time to play in this game? If he's not, obviously he's out. We don't need to worry about it, but that would make Ramondre Stevenson a start. Going up against the Jets that allow the 5th most fantasy points to opposing running backs, give me all the Ramondre Stevenson I can possibly get if there's no TreVeyon Henderson. If Henderson does play, Ramondre Stevenson for me probably is still a start, because it wouldn't shock me with New England having a playoff spot wrapped up but still fighting for the number 1 seed if they don't rest TreVeyon Henderson a little bit more this week and give Ramondre Stevenson more touches. So Henderson would be a fringe start. Drake May, he's going to be a start. The Jets allow the 9th most fantasy points to quarterbacks, and they've yet to have an interception all season long. Stephon Diggs would be a start for me in this matchup. I think he's the guy that has the best floor and the highest ceiling. Matt Collins has a solid floor. Kayshon Boutte, if he scores a touchdown, great, but he hasn't shown a whole lot of anything as of recent. Hunter Henry, way too up and down. Way too much of a roller coaster for me to try and risk it this week, because if you play him, you're either going to get a top 6, top 7 performance, or you're going to get a guy outside the top 20. For the New York Jets, let me just give you just a blanket rundown here real quick. I don't want to play anyone from the Jets. I don't even want to play Breece Hall. The only reason I'm listing him as a fringe start is because for a lot of you out there, if you're in championship week and you own Breece Hall, you might not have any other options. You might have to put him in your lineup. Going up against New England, who allows the 3rd fewest fantasy points per game to opposing running backs still, I don't want to play Breece Hall this week. I don't want to play anyone from the Jets. If you have to play anyone and you got to play Breece Hall, you're flexing him and you're hoping for a touchdown. We got a matchup here with a couple of teams still fighting for not only making it into the playoffs, but playoff seeding. Seattle is in the playoffs, but currently they're the number 1 seed. Carolina right now is holding on to the number 4 seed because they hold the division lead in the South. over the Buccaneers, who are still technically in it at this point. Carolina and Seattle should be a fun game this week, but it could end up being more defensive than offensive. Sam Darnold, Carolina allows the 8th fewest fantasy points per game. He's a fringe start, could definitely see a turnover or two, and could absolutely see a little bit of a rougher start to this game. Kenneth Walker is going to be a fringe start. Carolina allows the 8th most fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. If you own Kenneth Walker and you don't have better options, then you could risk it with him this week. All you got to hope for is some big plays like we saw last week, and that Seattle would be willing to give him the ball a little bit more often. JSN obviously is a start no matter what. We're not starting any of the other wide receivers. Carolina allows the 10th fewest fantasy points per game. AJ Barner has touchdown potential this week. Because the matchup is more difficult for the wide receivers, AJ Barner could end up getting some looks in the red zone. I think Carolina could be an absolute trap this week. I think Seattle's defense can get back on track against them. Bryce Young is going to be a no for me. Seattle is allowing the 9th fewest fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks, and the turnover potential is way too great with Bryce Young. Rico Dowdle is a fringe start. Seattle's allowing the 8th fewest fantasy points to opposing running backs. And after what I saw from him last week, there's not a ton of upside in this matchup. For the wide receivers, Ted McMillan, Jalen Coker, both are fringe starts. McMillan has higher upside. Jalen Coker might be a little bit safer. The reason these guys are both fringe starts and Bryce Young is going to be a sit is because I do see some negative game script. And if both of these guys can end up being the lead target getters, even though Bryce Young could have a rough day, he could still give these guys enough looks to make him at least flex worthy. And even though Seattle allows the 4th most fantasy points per game to tight ends, we haven't seen anything from the Carolina tight ends enough this season to try and risk it with them. New York at Las Vegas, and I'm all in on New York's offense bouncing back in a big way this week. We can start Jackson Dart. We can start Wan'Dale Robinson. Las Vegas allowing the 10th most fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers. And now you can hear a lot of noise in my microphone. I'm not even going to attempt to cut it out. What's going on right now is that they're building a house back behind me, and yesterday the gas company was out and they accidentally shredded all of the internet lines, and they're out here trying to rebury them and fix them. So everyone give a round of applause to the workers that ruined my day yesterday because I couldn't do any work. Anyway, they're making noise out there. Let's continue. Tyrone Tracy and Devin Singletary. Tyrone Tracy, he's the big play guy. This is a team, Las Vegas, allowing the 10th most fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. Tyrone Tracy, big plays, lots of potential. We can start him. Devin Singletary, if you are looking for any type of a flex option because you play in a 2-flex league, you got to risk it with somebody. Devin Singletary, I think, brings a solid floor to this matchup. Wan'Dale Robinson, Las Vegas is allowing the 10th most. I'm back on board with him being a start. Theo Johnson, Las Vegas hasn't allowed a ton of points to tight ends this season, and Theo Johnson has been up and down all year. Because it's a solid matchup for Wan'Dale and the running backs, Theo I would probably stay away from. This is the type of matchup that I love to research over on Underdog, because when I take a look at the projections, I feel like several of these players could go higher than the projections. And if you want to play those along with me this week over on Underdog and you haven't signed up yet, right now is the perfect time to do so. If you sign up using code Headliners, you're going to get a super special pick'em that is almost guaranteed to hit. And you can utilize that with any of the pick'ems that we may use from this Giants team as well. But not only could you get that, but when you play in your first $5 contest, you're going to get $75 in bonus contests. And Underdog right now is running an unwrapped promotion where every single day leading up to Christmas, they are going to have some awesome promos for you to utilize, including a Jahmyr Gibbs promo this week that absolutely should end up hitting. It is a gimme pick and one that could absolutely see a lot of green throughout the rest of the week. So get signed up over on Underdog using code Headliners and play along in this game with us. Is it possible that Ashton Jeanty could end up being one of the best players throughout the fantasy playoffs? Absolutely. A huge performance last week and an opportunity for another huge performance this week. New York is allowing the 3rd most fantasy points to opposing running backs. Ashton Jeanty is top 12 potential this week. Geno Smith, even though they allow the 4th most fantasy points, there's no way I'm playing Geno Smith fantasy week. And if I'm not playing Geno Smith, I'm not playing any of his wide receivers. Tyler Lockett's going to be questionable anyway at this point. I will, however, play Brock Bowers, even though the Giants allow the 6th fewest fantasy points, because this is a solid matchup for the quarterback position. Hopefully, he gets enough targets over to Brock Bowers to give him top 12 potential and really solidify this team as being a team that could help us win some fantasy championships, even though they're not going to be winning anything. The Eagles and the Bills could end up being very interesting this week. They both have clinched a playoff spot, and the Eagles have actually already clinched the division. And because of that, it'll be interesting to see how they maneuver their players over the next week or two. Could they still get a higher seed? Absolutely. So I still think they're playing to win this game, and it is going to be a solid matchup for them. Saquon Barkley, this is a Buffalo team that keeps getting shredded by the run. Saquon Barkley is a start this week. And for those of you that ended up wasting a pick on him earlier in the season, or at least it felt like it, if you've been holding on to him, he's helping you win fantasy championships right now. Jalen Hurts, he's going to be a start even against a tough Buffalo defense that allows the 5th fewest fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith, they're both going to be fringe starts. One of them could end up having a big game. The other could disappear. Both could have big games. Both could disappear. They've been that way all year long. Buffalo does allow the fewest fantasy points on the season, though, to opposing tight ends. So for me personally, Dallas Goedert is going to be a sit this week. Now, the reason Philadelphia is interesting is because depending on how this game goes, is there any point in time where maybe somebody gets banged up and they don't send them back out? Or if Philadelphia is losing by a couple of scores late in the game, do they end up pulling starters and just saying, hey, we're going to keep guys healthy? That's where things would become concerning for me. It will be worth noting that Josh Allen is going to be questionable with a foot injury heading into this game. Now, they've made it sound like he is going to play and he should be good to go. But here's another concern. If Josh Allen is good to go and he gets put out there and for whatever reason he starts to feel pain or he's just not entirely comfortable, does he get pulled off the field? That could absolutely end up happening. I'll still end up playing him, but you just got to be cautious about things like that. James Cook is going to be a start, one of the best running backs in all of football this year. Khalil Shakir will be a fringe start at best, and I've removed all the other wide receivers from this video because I have no interest in playing any of them. And then this matchup against Philadelphia is going to be tough for the tight ends. I don't want to play either of these guys. Could one of them score a touchdown? Absolutely. But it's going to be a game in which these guys might not see a ton of fantasy value until maybe late and score last minute, and then all of a sudden you kind of breathe a little bit of relief at that point. But for both of these guys, it's going to be really hard for them to put together a high ceiling fantasy day, and I think we have better options out there that are safer this week. Chicago at San Francisco. Both of these teams have playoff spots locked up, but they're playing for higher seeds still at this point. San Francisco is not out of the question in terms of still getting the number 1 seed. Seattle, Los Angeles, and the 49ers have all locked in playoff spots, and all 3 of them could still end up getting the number 1 seed. Caleb Williams is going to be a start. If 95-year-old Phillip Rivers can look fantasy viable against this team, Caleb Williams can as well. For DeAndre Swift, he's going to be a start. Kyle Monangai is going to be a fringe start. We saw Kyle Monangai be a little bit better last week in terms of overall efficiency, and I think they could end up running the football very well against San Francisco this week as they look to stick it to them on the ground and really stay balanced. DJ Moore is going to be the only start for me this week. Obviously, it took a huge play at the end of that game to score a touchdown for him to even be fantasy viable last week. Hopefully that type of connection keeps things going this week between him and Caleb Williams while we wait to hear more on Rome Odunze and Luther Burden. Colson Loveland will be a fringe start for me if Odunze and Burden miss. If either of those guys were to play, more than likely at that point, Loveland becomes more of a sit for me. And with the way San Francisco's offense is playing right now, I think we can basically start all of these guys. Brock Purdy's been fantastic. Christian McCaffrey, obviously we're playing him. Juwan Jennings has looked really good, and the Bears are giving up the 6th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. Juwan Jennings has touchdown potential once again this week. George Kittle came out at the end of last week, but from what I've read, it was more along the lines of just making sure that he stays healthy. It sounds like he's going to be good to go this week, so I'm still going to list him as a start. This is a great matchup for San Francisco. It's in prime time and it's at home, so I could see this offense having a very solid week against Chicago's defense. On Monday Night Football, the LA Rams, the Atlanta Falcons, and just like I said a minute ago with San Francisco, the LA Rams are still hot right now. They are trying to win that division. They are trying to potentially get get the 1 seed. They have already secured a playoff spot, but that doesn't matter. They want more than that. Matthew Stafford, the MVP candidate on Monday Night Football against Atlanta's defense. Give me Matthew Stafford to have a solid game. Kyren Williams and Blake Corum are both fringe starts for me because they're going to have to score touchdowns. I don't know if there's enough volume in this game for both of them to be flex considerations even just based on running the ball for 54 yards. They're going to have to score touchdowns or have some big plays. They're going to have to get involved in the passing game, so that's why they're fringe starts and not just starts for me. Puka Nacua clearly is a start. Davante Adams, we'll see this week. I didn't think he was going to play last week, but I think there is a possibility he could be back this week. Could be limited, so we're going to have to keep an eye out on that. Colby Parkinson, listen, he shattered so many dreams last week. If I were to list him as even a fringe start this week, I would be absolutely crucified. It's a tougher matchup. I'm staying away from Parkinson and any tight end, really. Atlanta does not have an easy matchup this week. Kirk Cousins is a sit for me. Bijan Robinson will still be a start because of basically what he can do in the passing game. Tyler Algier, he had a solid game last week. I don't see that happening against the LA Rams, who allow the 4th fewest fantasy points to opposing running backs. So Bijan Robinson, because of his passing game work, still is a start for me. Drake London didn't turn out that great last week. Absolutely get it. Still going down with my studs, and I'm going to start him again this week. He will be a fringe start just because it is Kirk Cousins playing quarterback. But right now, the Rams are allowing the 7th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. Absolutely could see Drake London getting back on it this week, and maybe he's not a wide receiver one, but should be a top 24 wide receiver. And Kyle Pitts, all of a sudden out of nowhere, is an all-pro talent and finally has realized how much better he is than the people around him, which is good to see, but hopefully he doesn't screw us over after we gain a ton of trust in him. And Headliner Nation, we'll still have content in Week 18. It's going to be a little bit of abbreviated content because we have to look at it different because there will be teams that have solidified playoff spots, and at that point, it really won't matter what they do, win or lose, and we could see a lot of starters rested next week. So because of that, Week 18 is going to be a lot different. So this week, what I would absolutely encourage you to do is go check out one of our best sponsors of the year, Harry's. And if you need any help getting clean shaven like I did a couple of weeks ago, or if you know anybody in your family or close friends that could definitely use a new razor this time of the year, then head on over to Harry's. Right now, you can get their trial set of their Harry's Plus razor for only $10. It comes with a new razor, a new handle, and you get some shaving cream with it. Go order that right now and pick up a few extra things for yourself while you're at it. Harry's has a ton of great products. They're not just here to help you shave, they're here to basically help you take care of yourself. So check out Harry's this holiday season, see what they got over there on their website, and make sure you use code Headliners to get their trial set for only $10. Headliner Nation, this is the last time that you'll see me before Christmas gets here. So first and foremost, have a very safe and happy holiday season. Whether or not you celebrate Christmas, please think of others this time of the year. Open a door for somebody, throw some change in a bucket if you need to, do a small donation here or there. Whatever you're willing and able to do could end up helping out somebody that just needs a little bit of smile on their face that day. And that is what this time of the year should be all about. My Christmas present this year is from all of you, and it's continuing to watch videos. It's continuing to be members, continuing to interact and stick around, and allowing us to continue to do what we love. So Headliner Nation, from myself, from my family, and from everybody else here at the Headliner crew, have a very Merry Christmas, a Happy Holidays, and I'll see you all on the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.